welcome to another edition of Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. In keeping with our theme of social and emotional needs of children, we're going to be looking specifically at what are known as overexcitabilities. Well, overexcitabilities are causes of social emotional issues, especially amongst gifted students. It is common with most students, but you see it predominantly as well with gifted students as well. Not all gifted students have these overexcitabilities, but enough of them do that it's noticeable. And so we're going to be talking about that today. There are 5 overexcitabilities. They are psychomotor, sensual, intellectual, imaginational, and emotional. So the first of these is psychomotor. Psychomotor basically means that a hyperactive kid is what we're looking at here. A kid who is really full of energy and is, almost bouncing off the wall, so to speak. And when they feel emotionally intense, they may talk compulsively, they may act impulsively, misbehave. And you see this manifest itself with kids when they blurt out answers and they're not following the classroom norms or the idea that they have to raise their hand and take turns and things of that nature. They may compulsively organize. They're really competitive, and so these are ways that this can manifest itself. They do get a lot of joy from activities that involve physical and verbal. But at the same time, they might find these overwhelming. And this is the type of kid, like I said before, who's kind of bouncing off the walls. They never seem to be able to sit still. And they're very talkative, chatty sometimes. So what are some things you can practically do in the classroom with psychomotor kids? One is to allow time for physical and verbal activities. Having these individuals do things that are very hands-on, are very kinesthetic, or having them participate in debates or having competitions. Things like this are really good for these types of students. So these are good for any student because it's going to engage them more rather than just sitting and listening passively. So it allows you to, doing activities that are more hands-on is going to engage these students. You have to make sure that these activities, however, are acceptable and not distracting. And what I mean by that is sometimes, as much as you want to have a competition, you have to not let it get out of hand. So you have to make sure that everyone is aware of the guidelines of what it is that you're doing and what the expectations are. And so doing a fun project can be part of that. And so another thing you can do in the classroom is have open-ended, spontaneous activities. So when you throw something like a challenge out at a student, maybe a STEM challenge that they weren't aware that you were going to be doing, and doing that with them, where they have all sorts of possibilities of answers. Something like that is, again, going to really engage their mind. And as a result, will they divert some of their overexcitability when it comes to their psychomotor skills. Sensual is the second overexcitability. And this is usually like a heightened sense of your senses, basically. So it could be sight, could be smell, touch, taste, hearing. But these are kids who are really, could be kids that are really susceptible to loud noises that bother them, or people talking too loud. It could be that certain smells bother them. It could be, the touch of something. I know my daughter has an issue with the tags in her outfits, and so that's a central overexcitability that she definitely has. So we have to remove all the tags from her clothes. And so because they have this increased susceptibility to this, they can be overstimulated and uncomfortable with this sensory input. So in other words, if they're really bothered by noise and you run a very noisy classroom, then that's going to be an issue with that particular student. Or if you have a student who is sensitive to smells like maybe perfume, and someone wears perfume and that bothers that student, then that's going to be kind of difficult to work with that student. And so what might happen because of these overexcitabilities, central overexcitabilities, is they may overeat, they may go to buying sprees, physical sensation of being at the center of attention. So basically, they are kind of taking it to they're overcompensating by taking it to the extreme. And so that's how that can show itself. And so, like I said before, clothing tags, classroom noise, smells from the cafeteria can be really distracting to these students. And because it's distracting, they can't focus on their schoolwork. So some strategies that you can do with students who have this issue. Whenever possible, have an environment that limits these distractions. So if your student is distracted by noise, give them a place to escape. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a quiet classroom. But what I did when I had students that had this overexcitability to noise is I would give them the opportunity to step out of the classroom and kind of, decompress from the noise. Or I let them work in the hallway or something of that nature where they could have some individual time where they could focus without being stimulated by the noise. Another thing that you could do is give them opportunities to be in the limelight. So in other words, these kids do like attention. And as a result, you want to have appropriate opportunities for that. So give them chances this could be anything like with elementary kids of having them share, something that they care about. It could be, at the high school level of having them perform in dramatic productions or debate or, things of that nature. And so these are again, productive, appropriate opportunities for them to be in the front of the classroom. And so they're still getting that attention that they so crave, but at the same time, it's a positive attention rather than misbehaving to get negative attention. Because there are those kids that will misbehave because it gets them attention of any kind. And then lastly, provide them time to dwell in the delight of this sense and help to kind of ease them. So if a kid is really sensitive to a smell, have them, ease into that so that they're not, it's not as if the smell from the cafeteria is bothering them, figure out ways to let them get to them in small doses so that they're able to build up to that. Intellectual overexcitability is the next one. And this is that kid who really seeks to understand, gain knowledge. They really are thinking all the time. And so they have really active minds because they're thinking all the time. They're really intellectually curious. They observe things that maybe others do not observe. I would say that Sherlock Holmes was definitely an intellectual overexcitability. He noticed things that no one else did. And there are kids who do this as well. They'll notice things that no one else is paying attention to. And so you have to be mindful of that. And they can concentrate and work on something intellectually, but at the same time, they may not be as good as coming to a conclusion to that problem or figuring out how to do it. So another thing that they like elaborate planning and having detailed visual recall. So they're really good at memorizing. Things come to them very easily. They will remember something that you yourself don't expect them to, but they do that anyways. They love theory because theory. And this is great for this particular podcast because the intellectual people are looking at theory, but not necessarily practice. And this is where the issue comes in, is that they want to think about something, but not necessarily about the practical applications of that, or would that be practical? And so, they have a lack of respect for children. They become about adult issues that they can't solve, like world hunger over in Africa. And so they just become so enthralled with this theory, they don't think about the practice of what it is that their ideas are. And then lastly, they can be independent. So as a result, they can be really critical of those that they deem unworthy. This is the student who does not suffer fools gladly. So if a student is not doing what their expectations are, not living up to what they want to do, this type of student may just totally shut down or not include them or things of that nature. So some strategies that you can do in the classroom. Basically, you need to show them how to problem solve. So they may be thinking about something, but they need to bring it to a head. They need to bring it to conclusion. So show them ways to problem solve, whether this is analysis, synthesis, or seeking to understand something. Another thing you can do is suggest ways for those kids who have moral or ethical or interested in those things to act upon concerns. So could they be involved in community service projects, Amnesty International, Or if they're concerned about hunger in Africa, could they, be involved in an organization that helps raise money for this? So, introducing them to community and worldwide problems where they feel like they're making a difference, no matter how small, can go a long way in helping them to meet this emotional need. Um, if a kid seems too critical or too outspoken, you need to make them socially aware of this. And so this is that social awareness that I talked about, and the social emotional learning. So, but basically helping them to realize that other people have feelings and their words have power, and how to, to properly, address an issue that they may be having. So, this is something that you'll be doing with kids your whole teaching career. But it's these kids especially need this, and it's not that they're not getting them at home necessarily. They just need constant reinforcement for what that looks like. So the fourth overexcitability is imaginational. Imaginational is basically kids who are, they associate images, impressions, metaphors. They're basically, this is that kid who literally thinks outside the box. So they're thinking about things in a way that most people are not. They're not very concrete. They're very abstract as a result. And so because of this, though, because of their overactive imagination, they can sometimes mix truth with fiction. So to them, it's not a lie, but it really is a lie. They're just kind of mixing the two together. And they can't separate the two. And so that's when it becomes an issue. So as a result, they have difficulty staying tuned into a class where there's not a lot of creativity or imagination being used, because that is their strength. And if you have a class where kids aren't being creative, then they're going to struggle in those particular classes. So if they're in a class that has a real rigid academic curriculum, but no outlet for creativity, they're going to struggle. So instead of doing what they're asked to, some of the things that they might do is they might, doodle, or they might, and now today's day and age, they may get on the computer and look at websites that kind of feed this imaginational overexcitability. And so they're going to find ways to meet their need if the classroom is not. And so if you don't have a classroom that meets these needs of imagination and creativity, then they'll come up with one of their own. And sometimes this may show itself in negative ways rather than positive ones. So some strategies for this one. So one thing you could do, because they confuse reality and fiction, help them differentiate between these two by having them think of a mental stop sign. So where they write down or draw the factual count before they start to go take it further. Because what happens is they start with a fact and they kind of embellish it. And so is there something that you can do, like some way you can remind them to put up like a reminder in their brain that this is where the truth ends and this is where I start to embellish. And that way they're differentiating between the two of them. Another thing that you can do is to let kids use their creativity. So a lot of times in school, we have a lot of structure and we have a lot of compliance, but some kids may not necessarily thrive with that. So if a kid takes notes and they're very visual, can they use the mapping process instead of the outlining process? Does it have to be in an outline form? Because the mapping process is very visual. You write terms and you circle it and you attach things to that. And so that this allows kids to use their creativity. Or do you allow them alternative assignments or assessments where they can, draw or paint or, use some of their creativity or an imagination, maybe to make films. So having ways that they can use this outlet rather than making them taking this square peg and trying to fit it into the round hole would go a long way in helping these students. The last one I'm going to talk about is emotional. And this is kids who have intense feelings. So they get extremely angry or extremely frustrated or extremely sad, but it's more than the norm. So their kids are gonna get frustrated and mad and sad all the time. But these kids, it becomes overwhelming for them, and as a result, they can't function as a result. And so what happens is this can sometimes have physical manifestations such as stomach aches, or or they're blushing, or they're they're sweating because they're anxious. So there's lots of there's some issues, physical issues with that. They're usually aware of their own feelings, and then they are very judgmental of themselves because of this. So because they're taking to the extreme, they are not being kind to their emotions, and the way that they think about it, they're judging themselves harshly. Um, and oftentimes, the first reaction is for us to say these kids are being dramatic or drama queens or being overreacting. But the problem is that we're not showing compassion or empathy towards the students, and we need to demonstrate that as teachers and students ourselves to make sure that these students are the model for these students, what that looks like. So some strategies that you can use in the classroom is, and this goes as a general rule of thumb, and I'm sure most of you do this anyways, but just accepting all feelings, regardless of the intensity, and knowing that certain students are going to react certain ways. You'll get to know your students really well, and you get to understand when something is happening and why they're being, overexcitable about that. I had a student that when you moved a pencil where he didn't want it to be, he seemed to freak out and would go berserk. But after a while, we learned that we just had to make sure his pencil was in the right way. And if it wasn't, we had to give him space to allow him to, express his frustration and then move on from that. And so we have to facilitate healthy growth and healthy emotions. Another thing you can do is, if you anticipate these physical or emotional responses, you prepare for them so you're ready for them. So, because a lot of times our knee-jerk reaction is to yell at that student or to punish them for not being compliant, or to accuse them of being overly dramatic. And we need to learn to look for the signs in these particular students. And then when those signs start to show themselves, we have to figure out ways to de-escalate that. And the thing about that with those students is that every kid's de-escalation is going to be different. And so you can work with the child to figure out what are ways that we can de-escalate, what are strategies that we can employ that will help us to do that. So those are the 5 overexcitabilities. It is important to recognize these, because that's how you meet the needs of the social emotional needs of these students, by recognizing that they are having their overexcitability is kicking in. And so you're reacting in the appropriate manner rather than just assuming that the student is, not doing what it is that they're supposed to be doing.